Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this panel discussion on vibing with Gen Z. This is a joint event between the ICAEW here in the Northwest, the Chartered Banker Institute and Manchester Metropolitan University. The recording has now started, just for all participants to be aware. So I'm Stuart Finity. I'm a reformed banker and now academic at Manchester Met. Clearly, I'm not Gen Z, but I do work with a lot of them, and I'll be your host today. So the format today, the first half, we'll get our panelists to share their experience, research, and expertise on Gen Z. And then after that, we'll open it up for your questions, and we'll address as many of those as we possibly can. So during the other part of the discussion, feel free to put the questions in the Q&A box, which you'll see on the screen. But before all of that, I'm going to get our expert panel to introduce themselves. So starting with Fiona.
Hello there. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Fiona Deering. I am a chartered management accountant and I am a senior lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University.
Thank you. And Carly.
Hi everyone, I'm Carly. I am an early careers development manager at Grace, which is a fast track developer of early talent.
Welcome and thank you. And David.
Good morning, everybody. I'm David Gibbons. I'm Associate Director within RSM for our HR client services. So we support all of our clients with all of their HR and people challenges and opportunities.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Fiona to share her experience.
Thanks very much, Stuart, and welcome everybody to today's session. So I'm just going to share a few visuals with you all today, and I'm going to give a little bit of context about my my research. So just bear with me a second. Okay, so I'm actually joining the conversation today to share some initial insights of my research. I'm exploring a group of young individuals who are navigating their journey into the workplace and the reciprocal obligations between that employment relationship. Generation Z is a concept that's used to describe and explain the experiences, values and opportunities that a group of young people born in between 97 and 2012. So this generation's thought to face a much more uncertain future than previous generations due to a number of kind of intersecting changes and crises. And these unique conditions really are shaping the way that these individuals consider their futures in relation to their families, their consumption, their approach to their lives. Theories of generation really have become central to debates around youth and social change. You know, in terms of the way that individuals orient themselves into the future. So a few things that we do already know about Generation Z, that they are known as digital natives. They have in fact never known a world without technology. We do know that 27% will be in the workplace by 2025. And some of the initial kind of perceptions of this and the research that's been conducted on this generation in regards to the workplace in particular has come from the Deloitte survey that have been running a millennial and Generation Z survey for a long time now, at least 10 years, I believe. We've got some Dell Technology research there, all citing this aspiration to work with cutting edge technology. 91% of the generation surveyed say they would use tech to influence their job choices. And other kind of decisions that they're making around work in regards to their choices on work-life balance and the opportunities for development, and 24% of the survey citing that they would choose the job based on their salary and other benefits involved. I'm actually coming at my research through something called psychological contract, which is this idea, this concept of that individuals' beliefs are shaped in regard to this exchange between the employee and the employer. So it's this mental schema of the individuals preparing for the workplace, feeling what are they obliged to provide to their employer, and in return, what does their employer provide for them. And so my participant groups have had all this experiences. They're busy going through this navigation period now where they've got this this perception of the workplace. And I think the main important factor here is this idea that these relationships are to be maintained. It's important to understand how these relationships are constructed, how they are formed, and going forward from an employer's point of view, the ability to like maintain these relationships, otherwise risk this breach or breakdown of employment relations. Some really early insights from my work then are showing this real shift from these when the original theory contributions were made, from real traditional reciprocal arrangements to a lot more complex mutual obligations on behalf of the employer and the employee. And this is what's really coming through my data. All the participants really grounded their aspirations about the workplace and their perceptions about the workplace. And they really cited this idea that the recognition of workplace disruption, in particular COVID and the impact that COVID had on their experiences at university, and how they are uncertain at how that is going to be received in terms of their personalities in the shaping of them in preparation for the workplace. Over half of them cited this lack of confidence about joining the workplace, and all participants did come across quite vulnerable in relation to these conversations that I was having with them about preparing for what that workplace relationship actually looked like. And so there was a real sense that this particular participant group, who had all attended university, felt that their experiences really framed these perceptions of that workplace relationship in the future. So just this final slides that I've got for you. A lot of information on here, but what this is showing is from my participant group on the left hand side, rather, the pink is the individual's obligation, and on the right hand side, the purple, is what they perceive their employer is obliged to provide in return. It's this reciprocal arrangement. So for example, the individual would cite, I would be obliged to provide extra effort in the workplace in receipt or in return for paid time off, advancement, and having a work-life balance. Equally, this obligation to stay around in the job, to have this minimum stay in return for job satisfaction and enjoyable atmosphere. Well-being was cited a lot and seems to be a new kind of consideration now in this relationship, and this advancement appears again. We've got this work hard relationship. Individuals felt they would work hard in return to that rapid advancement and in return for interesting work. And then the whole conversations around motivation was that these individuals felt motivated if there was some extra reward, if there was a fun social atmosphere. So before I move on and look for the others' insights on this, I just wanted to share some of these comments, actually, that these are direct quotes. I appreciate there's a lot on the slide here, but if I can just pick my way through some of these things. The first few are real kind of preferences. So we've got this change of scenery, or they might get bored. Wanting to be in the office was really interesting, because this generation who I've spoken with all feel that they want that social environment, they want that social atmosphere, and they actually wouldn't go for a role if they were 100% at home. Not liking early starts. Not sure if that's maybe all of us, maybe sometimes don't like an early start. That might be an individual thing rather than a Gen Z thing. If I take work home, what's the company going to do for me? That was quite a real clear reciprocation there of, I do this, what would they do for me? And then the others demonstrate this vulnerability, I think. I think that people can perceive you as being lazy because you're new and you're young. Also, I don't want my boss wants, if I don't do what my boss wants, I feel bad, or I might be seen to not be working very hard. So there's a real mix, and I think the main kind of so what here of what I'm trying to contribute here is this recognition that this generation cannot be this one homogenous group of individuals, and that it's become a lot more complicated, complex, and that these individuals, require this management on an individual basis, rather than just assuming that everybody, they're all exactly the same in terms of their beliefs. So yeah, I don't know where I'm going to stop sharing my slides now, and I'll pass over to Carly.
Thanks, Fiona. That was great. Before I kick off with some of my insights, I'll just do a quick overview for those of you that don't know what GRACE is, just to set the scene a bit and to understand where my insights come from. So GRACE is a fast-track development programme for graduates. We have an ethos of discovering, developing and delivering Gen Z, specifically our graduates. So we discover our graduates through intense recruitment processes, and it's a really robust recruitment sort of line that they go through. And we aim to get as many different diverse backgrounds through that process. We then develop our graduates, which is where I come in as a development manager. So we recruit into 3 streams, that's tech, change and data, which is where we see sort of that future capability build. And my job is to offer that one-to-one support and coaching, mentoring, qualifications, accreditation support, well-being support, performance support, all of that sort of wrap around in order to maximise the graduates' development. And then we deliver. So we then deploy our graduates out onto client sites. We work with a huge range of clients, from financial services to energy to pharmaceutical and health organisations, and we put our graduates in to complete projects with our clients in the world of change, data and tech. So I'm speaking to graduates and Gen Z day in, day out to offer that developmental support. And that's what really excites me, and wanted to get involved in this webinar because of that. So whilst working with Gen Z over the past few years, there are a few themes that I've noticed, which I'm sure we'll delve into a bit more throughout this webinar as the discussion evolves. But the first theme is really that shift in what's important to our Gen Z population in a potential employer. So I'm interviewing sort of almost every day now for graduates to come and join us and join our programme. And I'm really seeing a shift in what they're looking for. So a few years ago, it would have been questions around what's our salary, what's our benefits, what's the package looking like, what are career progression opportunities. And whilst I'm still getting that's still important to our candidates, we're also seeing a lot more questions around values and the alignment of that individual to us as an organisation. So it's more questions around what's our strategies, what's our values, what's our ESG and sustainability initiatives, are there volunteering opportunities, CSR, diversity and inclusion. So I had a question yesterday, what's our gender pay gap looking like? So it's those sorts of things that the Gen Z population are looking for a bit more. There was actually a recent study done by the Pew Research Centre where Gen Zers were asked what's more important to them, an employer's sustainability strategy or the brand name, so the company name that they're going for, and 75% said the sustainability strategy was more important. So when I was at university, it was all about the name of the company that you're going for. Which grad scheme have you got? Is it a Big Four? Is it a Magic Circle? Those sorts of buzzwords were thrown out, but now it's more important to 75% that they align with the ethos and sustainability drive of the organisation. They also found that 25% would not apply to a company that benefits or profits from unsustainable practices. So that's instantly ruling out organisations. So we're seeing a real big shift there, and employers are having to adapt if they want to retain and recruit the top talent from this new workforce coming in. The second theme that I've been seeing is the emphasis or the importance that the Gen Z population have on flexible working, work-life balance, and maintaining a positive mental health through work. So there's the old school ways of working where success would have been measured based on numbers of hours worked and sort of unwritten rules that you wouldn't leave the office before your manager and things like that. But we're seeing this Gen Z population flipping that on its head and really protecting their own time more. And there is evidence to support that that's a positive thing, so that maintaining good work-life balance and not reaching point of burnout increases productivity and output, because when you are working, you're fully focused, you can give your complete self, you can maximize your capacity and your capability. But on the flip side, there is two sides to that. So whilst having that flexibility is brilliant, and we do want to strive to have a good work-life balance, I think Gen Z shouldn't underestimate, and Fiona touched on this, that the power of visibility and the power of getting into an office. And whilst it's great to be able to put your washing on at lunch when you're working from home, it's also equally as good to get into an office, to build your network, to be able to ask questions to someone sat next to you, and to really sort of drive your career through visibility, and not becoming complacent and just having the expectation of remote working, I guess. And then the third and final thing that I just wanted to touch on was what I'm seeing through our training and development initiatives that we offer through Grace. Employers need to adapt to new ways of learning, new ways of training, new ways of teaching for this Gen Z workforce. So most of them have come into the workplace and have done virtual university. I know I'm primarily speaking about graduates here because that's who I work with, but I appreciate Gen Z isn't just graduates. But regardless of the format of studying, whether it be apprentices or university or school, the past few years of learning has been virtual for most people at that stage of their life. So they've had completely digital lectures. They've probably lived at home rather than gone and lived in their city, their university city, during a lot of this time. So when we're asking our graduates to come in for a face-to-face workshop that seems completely normal to us, that's a completely new concept, getting in a room or doing a face-to-face presentation. So we're having to adapt as well, and meet our graduates in the middle somewhere. Lots of them haven't even sat an exam since their GCSEs, for example, because they had their A-levels cancelled. So it's we're bringing it back to basics sometimes with those revision techniques, and also the work experience piece that's been missing during the pandemic time. So it's back to basics with that business etiquette as well, going back to setting up calendar invites or booking rooms in an office, things like that they've not done, where they've had all virtual work experience as well. So they're the three sort of themes that I've seen over the past few years, and you'll probably get the gist that there's a real sort of pre and post pandemic difference there. So I think whilst the Gen Z population is different to previous generations coming through, I think that's only really been accelerated through the pandemic, and we're seeing these changes even more now because of that. So I'll hand over to David now, and he can share some of his insights.
Thank you very much, Carly. So, I mean, I guess what can I really add that hasn't already been said by both Fiona and Carly? I guess where we've sort of been working with a lot of our clients with Gen Z, certainly, it's always good to provide a view from sort of the employer's perspective, because ultimately, all of you will see on the news, you'll see across kind of all kinds of publications that we sort of are in a bit of turmoil at the moment. Our economy isn't sort of performing as well as we would like. Unemployment levels are at their lowest they've been for a long time, if not the lowest they've ever been. But at the same time, everyone is absolutely scrambling around for talent. They physically can't get bums on seats. They can't get people to join their organization. They can't get the skills that they require. And as a result, they're really struggling with recruitment and retention. So combine that with the fact that they've got inflationary pressures with wages going up, everybody needing to have increased wages to match inflation. Even we're not even keeping up, nowhere near it, to be honest. It really sort of paints a picture of sort of employers not only having to deal with some of sort of the macro elements of the economy, but also then really honing it in on sort of the talent areas, which is what I tend to get involved with my clients. So there are some real positives here, because the new generations that have come through to work have actually really driven some of the key initiatives that you'll probably see amongst a lot of employers. So it's amazing how much the ESG agenda has been pushed over the last sort of 18 months, certainly sort of during COVID. Maybe it gave everybody a chance to sort of really look at that, but it's also been driven by employees. So the value proposition for new employees has meant that companies have had to do a lot of thinking, a lot of reflecting on actually what the value proposition is for people that want to join their company. That goes as far as gender pay gap reporting, which is what Carly mentioned. But, you know, ethnicity pay gap reporting is around the corner. It's not mandatory at the moment, but I can't see that. I can only see that going one way. And all of these are kind of direct consequences of a more informed workforce, a more technologically literate workforce, a workforce that can process information quickly, and ones that have now sort of really seen the value of work and life, and ultimately have a different set of values. So for an employer, that creates another wave of complexity to what they're doing, because the old ways don't necessarily work. So everything from conducting interviews to offering new roles to inductions to onboarding to learning and development, career progression, pathways, succession planning, all of those things are having to be looked at again, because the people that work for them are now moving away from those traditional routes. I have got sort of lots of statistics, but I'm very conscious that throwing numbers at you isn't going to necessarily give what I want to the appropriate gravitas. But we know that most of the Gen Z are going to be looking for promotion quickly. They're going to be looking for progression within their existing organization, and they're willing to leave the organization to find that progression if it exists somewhere else. Combine that with the fact that they do want to have their value or their values aligned with what the organization's looking for. So the ESG part, the values part, lots of research has been done to sort of look at what the value proposition is for companies and employees joining them, especially within the younger generations. So for an employer, what do? Do you hire people that you know aren't going to hang around, because that's how they're naturally geared at the moment, is they want to look for progression, so it's not really worth investing in them? Or do you have to look at the way your organization set up from a development perspective? So that involves looking at the job design, that involves looking at the kind of roles that you're looking for, how they're structured, what the incentives are, what the career development could look like, because it doesn't always have to go up. It can go to other parts of the organization. So we're seeing a big rise in secondments and more of a lateral move across organizations to get different experience in different areas, because that's building knowledge within those generations. And then at the same time, we're also seeing a fundamental shift towards engagement. So things around well-being, things around health benefits. We recently worked with a large zoo in the UK, and bonuses meant nothing to them. They didn't want bonuses as an incentive. What they wanted was health and well-being treatment, so they could have chiropodist appointments for their feet, because they walk around all day doing all of the stuff they do with the animals. So things like that underpinned a real misunderstanding of what generally employers think that their employees want. And Gen Z has only added to that, because there's now more complexity. There are now 5 generations within the workforce, which means your boss could be a millennial, your boss's boss could also be a millennial, but then you could have boomers, you could have Gen Y, all over the place. All of them have different values. So as an employer, how do you then manage that? What are the opportunities that come around from having such complexity in already quite a difficult environment to operate in? So we've been working a lot with our clients on some of the more fundamental pieces around what that value proposition, what that job design looks like. We know that a lot of people are going for jobs. We know that the stats suggest that having more of an ESG profile, making sure that you do report and you're transparent with your values, your beliefs, and general goodwill often goes a long way in capturing sort of the hearts and minds of potential employees in the Gen sort of Z bracket. However, we're also seeing a bit of a shift to sort of coming full loop to say that actually our business requirements don't necessarily accommodate a Gen Z workforce. We need everybody to come into the office 5 days a week. They need to be in from 9 o'clock at least until 6 o'clock at least, because our business thrives on osmosis, learning from each other, being in that. Now, to an extent, that matches up with what Gen Z are looking for. And certainly following the COVID pandemic, that's only exacerbated the challenge, is that people are much more favourable towards a hybrid working environment. They want flexibility within their work. However, they do want to have their engagement and their communications, their training to be face-to-face. So it's accommodating that as well. But also, I think the big thing that's missing with all of this is just around that transparency and communication. Is a lot of line managers, a lot of people that have the responsibility for growing an organization or reaching organizational objectives are very reserved about being open about career paths and being honest and frank about the tenure and the longevity of jobs. And those conversations often don't happen at appraisal time or a performance management conversation or a potential promotion conversation. And actually that's what we're having to encourage our clients to do a lot more of, because at the moment it seems that we're all moving further apart and we're having Teams calls and we're communicating a lot with each other. However, some of those values that our Gen Z and the new workforce that are coming in are missing out on is that transparency and that communication with each other about what engagement looks like in the organization, what career progression looks like in the organization, and those career paths forming sort of long, necessarily 5, 6, 10 year career pathways, or 2 years here, 1 year here, seeing different functions, and ultimately knowing that they might leave after 5 years, just making sure that in that time both parties create the most value for each other. So I'm not going to go too much more into sort of, I tend to go down rabbit holes if I get down to one particular area, so I'm gonna leave it there. But the points I would leave are that from an employer's perspective, they're in a really tight spot at the moment because they're trying to reach their objectives, they're trying to employ people, they're trying to get people into the organization that have the right skills and capabilities to take it forward. Combined with that, they have multiple generations all trying to work together to be able to achieve that. And so far, we've seen a lot of good things coming out of that, but it's not without its challenges.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers. If you want to add a question to the panel, please pop it in the Q&A box. What I'll do is I'll maybe very quickly summarise some of the things that I've taken from that today. Fiona described her research around the psychological contract and the obligations, the implicit obligations that Gen Zs are expecting from employers. And that seemed to feed through into what Carly was talking about in terms of what Gen Z candidates are asking for, and also the support that are needed. And David elaborated on the complex environments that employers are facing with difficulties in onboarding, retaining staff, and how you invest in them as they're going forward. So as the questions are coming in, one that's already been sent in is, we've been talking about Gen Z as one block here, but also COVID's been mentioned multiple times. Is there a difference between the pre and the post pandemic Generation Z? Fiona, are you seeing that in your research?
Hi. Yes, because prior to, I've worked with students for the last 12 years in the university, and having conversations, not necessarily directly in relation to my research, but having those conversations and helping those individuals prepare for the workplace, that clearly wasn't on the agenda, that wasn't a thing. So there was other concerns, there was other considerations to help them to navigate into graduate recruitment. And it seems to having the conversations now for the research, a real emphasis on that impact that they feel has had on them. So absolute difference because of COVID, yes. I think the complexities, I think the changing in technological advancements, I think the changes in that general macro environment have always existed, but I think COVID is definitely in the top considerations now, having just the whole way that they're considering where the workplace will actually be, you know, in terms of hybrid work, working from home, working in an office environment. And it seems to be really kind of informing their perception of the new relationships that they're going to be developing. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, that whole conversation around they feel vulnerable, they feel, you know, these are people that haven't had any experience yet, so they can only base on their observations from family members, which is what quite a lot of my participants talk to me about. Their you know, how their families coped, how individuals saw their parents working through COVID, and indeed themselves studying through COVID, and they can only base their perceptions of the future employment on what they've observed from their family and their parents. And so it really is, I don't know if that actually ended up answering the question or adrift a little bit, but there is a difference, yes, between those before and those after, from my point of view, yes.
And Carly, you're dealing with sort of recruiting these individuals. Are you finding that's feeding through as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think when we look at the graduates that we have coming in now, as I mentioned earlier, they've had virtual learning, they've had virtual university. Lots of them have had to miss out on work experience that our graduates coming in previously would have had. So, you know, before I was a graduate, I was, you know, having work experience from sort of 16 in school, and then part-time jobs even to learn customer experience skills. I think all of that has gone out the window for this this cohort that's coming in now. So we're really having to go back to basics with a lot of that, and we're having questions like, you know, do I need to ask to go to the toilet when I'm at work? Because that's what they would have done in school. And then this is their next, they've not skipped that university or apprenticeship stage, but they've had it completely differently. They've had it at home in their bedroom. So it's really about sort of, you know, how do I send an email? How do I, all of that just sort of business basics, business etiquette stuff. What do I wear when I go into the office? What does smart casual mean, which seems to be everyone's dress code? So it's about, we're doing lots of sessions around that. And then the other thing, unfortunately, is the struggle that people are having with their mental health. We're finding post-pandemic. So we're doing a lot more wraparound employee assistance programs, focusing on well-being, you know, well-being sessions, well-being networks, how to prevent stress and burnout and things like that, because, you know, they were doing everything at home prior, and now we're saying, come into the office, and they've got, you know, social anxiety after not being out of their house for 2 years, and those sorts of scenarios we're finding ourselves in. So it's about being very sensitive, I think, to people's mental health as well.
And David, all the way through Carly talking, I could see you nodding away. Are you seeing that from an employer perspective?
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of sort of exposure to this, and I think we've had clients who have seen a marked difference because, I mean, RSM do this. We have graduates each year for our cohort to come into our tax and audit and advisory functions. But within some of our larger clients, they've seen a marked difference in the agility and the learning of graduates that have been coming into the office. And that is a direct consequence of COVID. That's a direct consequence of not being in an office, learning off of the senior people within that organisation. Would I say, I would say that the COVID pandemic has hit every generation differently. I think that people that were originally trying to, you know, that had a 9-to-5 job in the office that suddenly had to go work from home, some took to it like a duck to water, others really struggled. But specifically for Gen Z, you know, we've seen clients who they invite their new employees or their graduates into the office, but they've never been in an office environment before. But not only that, the office is barely full. There's only 3 or 4 people in a very big office, and these individuals don't know, as Carly mentioned, they've never worked in an office before, so they're not really familiar with the etiquette. Like, what should I wear? What do I do? How do I print something off? Because I'm usually used to doing everything on PDFs or on iPads, and I'm using this laptop to have to print something to proof. And it's all of these things that we sort of always took for granted, as just everyone kind of got on with it because they could see around them what everyone else was doing. But now a lot of more interaction is happening where you can only see the heads and shoulders of everybody that you're talking to, and actually the on-site, the stuff that's actually going on in the office, a lot of people have had to learn that really quickly. And we're seeing a lot around the mental health side, and the stress levels and the anxiety levels as well, which is what Carly mentioned, within those populations. So as an employer, a real sort of disregard for kind of, an assumption was made that actually, oh no, it's fine, everyone will come back and everyone will know exactly what to do, when actually that hasn't been the case at all, and it has had an impact.
I can only imagine how tough it is. I mean, I joined banks many years ago, but I learned most of what I learned from the person sat next to me. They used to call it learning from Nelly, and it's all the stuff that was really important that wasn't in the manual, but was just so important. I can't imagine how difficult it is if you don't have that.
Mm.
Maybe staying with you, David, because the questions come in specifically about how employers offer incentives around helping to pay off student debt. But maybe if you could pick it up and talk about how incentives are changing in general, and pick up that, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question, I guess, and you may or may not be familiar, but the student loans taken out of your gross pay rather than your net pay. So obviously you don't pay tax and then you have to pay off your student loan, which is obviously a good thing. What we have seen is not necessarily as such saying that we would pay off student debts, but rather that you usually see that in a sort of cash incentive that would come through in your salary. So that could be in addition to your basic salary, or it could be, something that's probably more long term. So it could be 3, 6, 12-month incentive plan to stay with the organisation with an incremental cash increase to help pay for student debt or student loans. So that would affect gross pay, which is where your student loan would come out. But you make a really good point around how incentives have been changing recently, because a lot of employers are really struggling. I did mention it briefly before, but with everybody's salaries having to go up by incremental amounts, or in some circumstances quite large amounts, what we have seen is a massive rise in the wage bill, and that affects profitability, that affects the sustainability of a business. And in desperately trying to reach talent, they're bringing in people at probably inflated salaries, and that all has to be paid for at some point. So what a lot of employers have been seeking is alternative ways to incentivize their employees that don't necessarily carry with it a fixed contractual obligation around base salary. So some of the things that we have seen, I mentioned before, secondments, increased holiday days, people having their birthdays off, and if it falls on a weekend, either the Friday or the Monday, either side of their weekend. We've seen the introduction of volunteering days, where you can take out between one day, say a quarter every 3 months, to do volunteering. And also wellbeing days, where for one day in a quarter or a month or a year, you can take the day off and focus predominantly on your mental health, or get involved with any initiatives that the organisation might put together. That is then related to benefits such as subscriptions to things like Headspace, which, albeit sounds a bit sort of like signposting, it represents sort of the employer's willingness or attempt to try to look for alternative ways at making sure that they can meet the needs of their employees' requirements. And all of this tends to come from things like pulse surveys and employment engagement surveys, because a lot of our clients don't actually know what their employees wanted or needed. I mentioned the zoo earlier. That's indicative of what you think you probably don't. So find out and action it. So we have really seen a shift in how incentives and how rewards have been incorporated into attracting talent.
So employers are responding to that change in the psychological contract, which Fiona was talking about at the beginning.
Well, yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, Stuart, companies really do need to find ways of keeping their talent, because at the moment it seems like a revolving door. It's sort of the turnover is really increasing, and they are going to be looking to find ways of keeping employees in situ and sort of getting a return on investment for that upfront cost to hire them and to train them. What they are missing, I would argue, as a result, is that psychological contract of that realistic job preview, telling the employee what the role is and what it isn't, what they can offer them, what they can give them, rather than selling them a pipe dream. Promising them the world to then find out 3 to 6 months later that it was all completely false, and they've actually dented that psychological contract.
That makes sense. And Carly, I could see you nodding away. Are you seeing that with the candidates you're working with?
Yeah, definitely. I think where we try and change the mindset a bit here is focusing on the longer term rather than those immediate short-term wins. So rather than, can I have a pay rise every 6 months sort of thing, we're thinking about what's your long-term career goal and how we're going to get there. So it's not necessarily what are you going to do, what's your next step going to be, but it's about, I've heard it referred to as squiggly careers once. So it's about understanding the importance of a sideward step sometimes in order to get that experience to get you to where you need to be, and identifying skills gaps. So we do lots of skills gaps analysis with our graduates. Where are you now? What are the skills gaps that you need to fill? And then you can get to your ultimate career goals and your ultimate, you'll have the benefits package that you desire and all of that lovely stuff. But it's about having a fulfilling career as well as just the incentives and the package. So that's sort of where we're at the moment, is changing the dial on the mindset between hopping every couple of years to get a greater bonus or a greater salary, and trying to get our graduates to think about staying with one organisation but getting everything they need in terms of the steps within there.
Well, that nice bit of advice is useful, because I on the call and watching this afterwards is going to be quite a few different groups, some employers and a lot of students and a lot of very recently employed graduates. I guess, Carly, staying with you, if you were going to give some advice to one of these Gen Z individuals about succeeding in the workplace, what would it be?
I think it would be, don't be passive. So you've got to be active. Things aren't just going to come knocking on your door and a wonderful opportunity is going to be there. For very few people that might happen, but for most of us, you've really got to go out and try and get it, go above and beyond, say yes to everything within reason, and be visible in the office, get yourself known, build your network. You never know what speaking to someone at the coffee machine is going to open up for you, and the next career moves that can come as a result of just casual conversations. So really be there, be visible, get stuck in. So join in with your organisations, volunteering opportunities, attend socials, go above and beyond, that put your hand up for tasks that no one else wants to do. Just build. It's all about that personal brand piece, really. It's about building your brand and your reputation within your organisation, and that's what's going to set you aside from others around you.
Wonderful. Be visible, build his brand. I like that. And Fiona, I could see you nodding there. You engage with students at an even earlier stage. What's your advice to the Gen Z students about succeeding?
Yeah, absolutely. All of what Carly said, all of what David said, working with students over the last 12 years in university, having seen that change in their mindsets, I think also being a personal tutor in our university and having those individual conversations is to really support that, of recognizing the strengths, recognizing your own strengths, and in order to get this relationship, a healthy relationship with this, with the employer, in terms of your perceptions and trying to build up that story and that picture, is to try and get yourself as informed as possible. So whilst, yes, there is this you know, the world is changing. Yes, we've had this terrible pandemic that's impacted all of us in one way or another, that actually we're now coming out the other side of it. We're now navigating that and being aware of the fact of how they can embrace themselves and what they've got to offer for their career, and you know, taking that forward and really immersing in as many opportunities as possible. I think working with employers coming into the universities, you know, Stuart, and you know, sort of making our students aware of this, because it's really refreshing to hear that everything that's been said today is really kind of echoing what's coming from the research. And you know, there's so many similarities with what we're all saying today. I think students, it is about just embracing who they are, overcoming that confidence, because that's the bit that's took the biggest dent, as Carly was mentioning, the whole not feeling like they've had that full experience in their education. It's really impacted their confidence, it's really impacted their social skills, and they're really on one hand, they're really craving to be in a social environment and they want that to be fun and enjoyable, and on the other hand, they're really concerned that they're not ready for that. They feel, this particular student group, that they don't have the confidence, the skills to jump into that just yet, and so on, actually delaying that transition, actually choosing to continue to do postgrad study, to do further professional qualifications, because they are quite vulnerable to that, how they're going to be received, because they feel they don't have the experience. So I guess it's about us as a university really endorsing them and you know, really supporting that they've got these amazing strengths that they can take forward, and that they have, you know, they are you know, embracing their own abilities. Really, that's what I would suggest.
Okay, and I'm making notes because I can't help myself, but you know, the idea of building the skills, building your confidence, working on the gaps, getting yourself out there, which dovetails nicely with what Carly was saying as well. David, what would your advice be? And you can echo some of that if you want, but have you got?
Yeah, I mean, what can I say that hasn't already been covered? I guess that, so, and specifically for Gen Z, right? You are going to be, as a generation, the most qualified generation in the workforce. You're going to be the most digitally competent, and that's good because the AI revolution started 10 years ago, but now ChatGPT's come out, everyone's now starting to take a lot more notice. I guess what I would say, and because I do quite a lot of coaching for sort of senior leaders within businesses, and they always sort of come back with the same thing that I've kind of used to sort of support people that are coming into work. But if all goes well, you're all going to be working for the next 50 years of your life. So, you know, if the working and the retirement age keeps creeping up, and we sort of end up, you know, retiring when we're, say, 68, 70, 50 years is a long time. And so I would always encourage you to sort of not rush it. There's lots to do and there's lots of things you can get involved with. I'm a big believer of doing what you enjoy. You can usually tell that if you're knackered after doing something for a couple of hours, it's not naturally aligned with your strengths. It's typically going against those strengths. If you can find out you can stay up till midnight doing something and you've lost track of time, that's because you've got the energy to do it because you're aligned to it. So I would always try and align yourself with work and a role that you get energy from, rather than something that saps your energy from you. And yeah, I would just emphasize the fact that we're all going to be working for a long time. So there's not necessarily a rush to be promoted as quickly as possible, because you're going to get to that top post and then realize I've got nowhere else to go. And then you'll have to maybe look left and right rather than up.
No, I like that, and I can see Fiona in particular smiling, because that strengths approach between doing what you're good at what you also energize you and enjoy, I know is a key part of her work that she does with our younger students. I guess, Carly, I'm going to come to you this question that's come in, which is what do universities need to do in order to prepare Gen Z for the workplace? I'm going to resist going to Fiona first, and maybe get yours and then David's take. Are there gaps in what you think universities need to do, or do you need to change how they approach this?
That's a really good question. I think Fiona's probably more qualified in this space than I am, but I think compared to when I was at university, and it might be different now, but I think we can do more of that work experience prep. So there's lots of the theoretical side of things, and in getting you ready to study, and you learn all about commitment and presentation skills, organization, all of those lovely things come as part of your university. But I think we could do more on that. So when you come into the workplace, you're already at a level where you understand what the business basics are, what's the business etiquette. And I know there are some networks that go on at universities where they do consultant things and simulation of the real working world. But I think that the more of that we can do, the better, just to make people feel ready and give them that confidence that Fiona was talking about earlier, that they can from day one, talk with confidence when they go in and introduce themselves, and even some of that interview prep as well could feed into that. So what are we doing to help people have a face-to-face interview that they might never have done before, and upskill them in assessment centres and all of that extra stuff in order to be successful when they start in the working world.
Wonderful. And again, I was just going to Fiona, because I know she'll have a view on this. David, what's the view from the businesses you're working with about what universities need to do or are doing well?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that Carly just said. With our clients, they are seeing that most graduates are coming out, and there's that sort of typical, they need to sort of earn their stripes, and they sort of need to get knee deep in it, and get steep learning curve, all that kind of thing, because you're not at university now. I would say that I would encourage universities to look at the practical application of the stuff that they are teaching, to actually look at that in terms of sort of so if it is business, then it's usually straightforward, but just some of the things that you're doing sort of from a theoretical perspective, or any of the academic research that's going on, your dissertations, whatever it might be that the endeavours that you're undertaking, is just looking at that practical application in life. It's not everyone's going into business, some go off to do different things. But I would say that there is that kind of real world experience that you can either get through those secondments or work experience, or just things that sort of throw you outside of your comfort zone. I'm not saying, you should go and do something that's going to terrify you, but actually getting out and sort of doing things that you wouldn't typically do as being in your comfort zone, I think is a really good way of steepening that learning curve. And I think that increases agility. I think that really helps with your ability to react and respond to different things, different challenges, which I think universities can take an active role in.
Wonderful. And if anyone on the call getting out of their comfort zone includes asking a question, feel free to put one in the Q&A box while I go to Fiona. What's your view on that? Are the universities doing some of that? Do we need to do more? What's your view?
Yeah, the universities are absolutely doing all of that. I think the biggest challenge for us is that we absolutely recognise that, and we offer so many opportunities for the students to embrace this and to develop their confidence, and we work with a huge amount of employers. We have different guest speakers, and we have lots of assessment centres. We do lots of professional development work with our students. I think this is not a quick fix in regards to the approach, because I think students, it's not until they've gone through the process, and the hindsight is a wonderful thing, and that they start getting out in that environment, and they suddenly wish, I wish I'd have kind of maybe considered this a little bit more. It didn't seem as applicable to me at the time. I wasn't quite as long-term focused. I was quite strategic. We tend to see that quite a lot, and I think it is a real challenge for us in the university, because we definitely are offering lots of support in that regard. So I think it's just continuing with that. For me, it's just really passing across that energy, enthusiasm, quoting back, things like this, things like conversations we're having today, and working even closer with you guys as externals of the university, and in your specialist field of recruitment, and just keep reiterating that and keep demonstrating the benefits. You know, and we work really closely with our alumni, which are amazing, because we're able to ask them to come back into the university, and I think that has a real appeal when our newly graduated individuals who are now in employment can come back and share their real honest, open experiences. I think that's really powerful, and I think that's going to, you know, just more of that stuff, really, just to keep the practical side of it, the reassurance, and keep promoting the you know, working on their professional development, their personal and professional development. I think that's going to be, but I don't think there's any quick overnight fix. I think we've had a real hiccup in this transition with COVID, and so we've kind of been set back a little bit, but very hopeful, optimistic of getting forward, moving forward with that, I think.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And yeah, you'll end up having ex-bankers and accountants working in universities, hopefully bring some of that in, but I may be biased with that. Okay, we've got time really for one more question, really, to sort of summarise some of this. And I guess all the way through, there's been this idea that there's been implicit change, either in the unspoken contract or actually what Gen Z students and graduates are asking for their employers. In what way are these reasonable and positive requests, and in what way are some expectations maybe unrealistic? Maybe it's quite a good way to summarise. Fiona, you're still on my screen, so I'll go to you first.
I don't know, really. I mean, I'm thinking that some of these are maybe not Generation Z specifics. These are just personal preferences. I think that these personal preferences that I'm seeing coming through, you know, potentially, yeah, reasonable to accommodate. I think there's a lot of that going on based on hearing what Carly and David have said, that, you know, organisations are definitely being super supportive in that transition from pre-employment. So I think, you know, and I think it's about just being more visible, like David said, about being even more visible if possible, being as clear as possible, so that there's not these you know, this mental schema being built up on some inaccurate assumptions, that we need to be really clear, so that this whole relationship is, you know, it's understood how it's developed, what is shaping that development, and how that can then be best maintained by being as transparent on both parts as possible, really, and being yeah, accommodating on both sides, I would say, and being realistic. Yeah.
Wonderful, be realistic, nice advice. And I guess, Carly, you deal with wraparound sort of care, helping graduates here. I guess this must come up quite a bit, does it?
Yeah, and I think some of it's definitely reasonable, and definitely things like wanting a sustainable organisation, an organisation that's driving D&I agendas, all of that stuff is completely acceptable, completely the way we should be going. I think where, and it's not unacceptable, but I think sometimes a bit of a misalignment is when things are expected. So things like the flexible working and hybrid working or remote working, whatever it is, where we're seeing some Gen Zers come into the workplace and just be expecting to work at their own schedule, or be allowed, you know, pick the days that they work from home, and it doesn't always work in a business environment. So it's about understanding that there's still going to be boundaries in the workplace, and there's still, you know, we should appreciate the fact that we've now got flexibility, and it's one of the only good things that's come out of the pandemic, is that we can have this opportunity, but it shouldn't be expected or taken for granted.
So put boundaries in place. And David, I guess this is part of the complexity that the people you work with need to deal with. What are you seeing in terms of reasonable and unreasonable expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of I think that I quite like pushing unreasonable expectations, because then you find a sort of equilibrium between sort of the employee and employer agreement. You know, people would have laughed at the fact, you know, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, that if you've got over 250 employees, we want you to report on what the gap is between what you pay your men and what you pay your women. But it's now it's now mandatory. You now have to report that or every year if you have over 250 employees, and people that don't have 250 are still reporting it because they want to promote it as a way of attracting talent to their organization. And it's a fundamental thing, is we pay our women the same as we pay our men. And if you then extend that to ethnicity, again, that would have been laughed at, but that's now starting to make its way in as well. So I don't think that there are some requests or these drivers that are forcing companies to look at their ESG agenda and to look at how they pay, their equality, their diversity. You know, we do a lot of reviews for our clients on their ED&I, and there are gaping holes in some of the things that they aren't doing. And I think it's absolutely fine to make those requests of potential employers with those sorts of things, because it drives social value. I think that it definitely has its place. But I guess, you know, I would echo exactly what Fiona and Carly have said around that sort of transparency, the communication. You know, there are some reasonable requests that can be made. I think for employers, they're sort of bracing themselves a little bit for kind of all the things they have to do in order to sort of get through to the new workforce. They would probably argue, speaking frankly, that they are being very accommodating, but I would argue that that's the future of your organization. So actually, is it them that needs to change, or is it you that needs to change? Because the tide's only going one way, in my view. So you either embrace it and you find ways of how you enhance your organization with that, and you use it as a strength, rather than trying to move it away. So for me, I would say that no request is unreasonable. I'd say that you need to be able to have those conversations, though, which is not what's going on as much as it should be at the moment.
The tide is only going one way, a tremendous way for us to finish today. So part of our contract is to finish vaguely on time. So I want to say thank you to Fiona Deering, Carly Walsh and David Gibbons for a really insightful and interesting talk. I think we could continue for another hour. Thank you to the ICAEW, the Chart Banker Institute and our colleagues at ManMet. And thank you for you for being part of this. Our next event is on the 24th of May, and we will pick up some of those themes on artificial intelligence, and maybe it will carry on from today's discussion. Thank you very much. Hope that was useful, and we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone.